West Oxfordshire District Council spent 3 years trying to stop Jeremy Clarkson selling potatoes. They refused him, they restricted him, they blocked him. But here's what they never understood. They weren't stopping him. They were building him an empire. £8 million of one, built entirely from their own paperwork. And by the end of this, you'll see exactly how they did it, without ever meaning to. Let's start where it actually started. Not with a business plan, with a shed. In 2020, on 1,000 acres of Oxfordshire farmland that Clarkson had bought 12 years earlier for £6 million, a small wooden structure appeared beside the road. Inside it, potatoes, grown on the farm, priced at whatever felt fair, sold on an honesty system to whoever happened to be driving past. There was a hand-painted sign. There was, by most accounts, very little else. This is not the origin story of a retail empire. This is the origin story of a shed with vegetables in it, built by a man who had recently discovered that farming loses money with alarming reliability and thought he might as well sell what he'd grown rather than watch it rot. Then Amazon Prime aired the first series of Clarkson's farm, and the shed became a pilgrimage site. Within weeks, the queue for that shed stretched further than the road was designed to hold. Cars parked on verges, cars parked in gateways, cars parked, on at least one well-documented occasion, in a manner that required police intervention to unpick the resulting 3-mile tailback on a country lane that had gone 80 years without seeing that sort of traffic. West Oxfordshire District Council, watching a wooden shed generate the kind of congestion usually associated with motorway roadworks, did what any council would do. They stepped in. What followed was not a single decision. It was a slow accumulation of conditions, each one reasonable in isolation, each one designed with genuine planning logic behind it, and each one, taken together, a set of restrictions that would have crushed an ordinary retail operation before it had properly begun. The council imposed a sourcing radius. Produce sold in the shop, and later in the proper farm shop that replaced it, had to come from within 16 miles. Not from wherever was cheapest, not from a national wholesaler with a warehouse in the Midlands. From 16 miles, full stop, measured presumably with a compass and a map of the Cotswolds, and enforced with the seriousness normally reserved for matters of considerably greater public safety. They restricted the car park, they restricted the opening hours, they cited the area of outstanding natural beauty and the impact of commercial activity on a rural setting, and they were not wrong to be concerned. A shed that had briefly stopped traffic on the A44 was, on paper, exactly the sort of thing a planning authority exists to manage. What they hadn't accounted for was who was filming it. Here is the detail that most coverage of this story gets wrong, or simply misses entirely, because it requires sitting with the numbers rather than the headline. The 16-mile sourcing restriction should have killed the farm shop. Any retail consultant, presented with that condition before the business existed, would have said the same thing. You cannot run a profitable shop on a supply radius that small. You will run out of suppliers. Your range will be embarrassing. Your margins will collapse under the logistics of sourcing everything from a handful of local farms rather than one efficient national distributor. Lisa Hogan, Clarkson's partner, and by most sensible accounts the operational intelligence behind a considerable amount of this enterprise, later admitted something rather remarkable in an interview that the business press mostly skimmed past. The 16-mile radius, she said, was the best thing that ever happened to them, not despite being a punishment, because it forced them to do something no rival farm shop in Britain had bothered to do: build direct relationships with every small producer within reach. Cheesemakers who'd never had a proper retail outlet, beekeepers selling to one shop instead of nobody, a butcher 2 villages over who suddenly had a guaranteed buyer paying a fair price instead of whatever the wholesale markets were offering that week. The council thought it was writing a restriction. What it actually wrote was a supply chain that money cannot buy and that no competitor can replicate without living through the exact same 3 years of enforcement notices. Because here is the thing about provenance. Genuine, verifiable, 16 miles, and you can prove it provenance. You cannot manufacture it with a marketing budget. You cannot license it. You cannot buy your way into it by hiring a good photographer and putting locally sourced on a chalkboard. It either exists because a regulator forced you to build it under duress, or it doesn't exist at all. Diddley Squat Farm Shop has it because West Oxfordshire District Council made them earn it. one furious planning meeting at a time. Within a year of opening properly, the shop's assets had gone from roughly £44,000 to over £1.3 million. It now turns over an estimated £2 million annually and draws something in the region of 250,000 visitors a year, to a shed's worth of provenance in the middle of a field that a council spent 3 years trying to make smaller. And every single refusal, every enforcement notice, every council meeting where a planning officer read out an objection to a camera crew that had every reason to be there, all of it aired. All of it became content that millions of people watched, sympathised with, and then drove to Chipping Norton to personally witness the aftermath of. The council thought they were the regulatory authority. In practice, they were the antagonist in a story that needed one, and audiences have always loved rooting for the underdog against the faceless bureaucracy. Even when on the actual planning merits, the bureaucracy had a reasonably sound case. This is where it gets genuinely clever, not lucky, clever. The council refused Clarkson's application for a restaurant at Diddley Squat. They issued an enforcement notice against the one he'd already opened. They refused the car park expansion that would have made the whole operation function properly. Application after application went the same way. Cited, considered and declined, with the area of outstanding natural beauty invoked each time like a formula. Every single one of those refusals was, on paper, a defeat. Every single one of them was filmed, and every single one of them became, in practice, an advert. But here is what almost nobody watching at the time fully understood. Clarkson had already worked out that the farm shop, however successful, would always have a ceiling. It sits on temporary planning permission that could, in theory, be revoked. It's bound by a sourcing radius the council imposed, and has shown no interest in relaxing. It is, structurally, a business the council can still reach, if it decides to. So while the council was busy refusing his restaurant, Clarkson bought a pub, not a farm building, not an extension to something already under planning scrutiny, an actual freestanding, already licensed public house in Chipping Norton, roughly a mile from the farm, for £1 million. The farmer's dog had none of the constraints that governed everything else in the Diddley Squat operation. No 16-mile sourcing radius, because that condition was attached to the farm shop's specific planning permission, not to Clarkson personally. No restriction on opening hours beyond a standard licence. No enforcement notices, because there was nothing to enforce. It was a working pub, doing exactly what pubs are licensed to do. You could serve whatever you wanted, from wherever you wanted. You could change the menu whenever the season demanded it, without applying to anyone for the privilege. You could stay open on your own terms, with your own hours, answerable to a licensing authority rather than a planning committee that had spent 3 years demonstrating precisely how much friction it was prepared to apply. It was not a farm. It was a door the council could not lock from the outside. Clarkson renovated it, and in doing so made a decision that tells you everything about how deliberately this was constructed. He put in a 360-space car park. Think about that number for a moment. You do not build a car park that size for a village pub's regulars. You build it for people who are going to drive an hour, arrive without a booking, and wait. The farmer's dog now employs 146 people. It sources British-only ingredients as a point of principle rather than obligation. No Heinz, no Coca-Cola, black pepper from Cornwall at 10 times the price of the imported variety. A wine list that Clarkson himself has admitted causes his accountant genuine distress. He's described the whole enterprise without apparent embarrassment as a brilliant way of turning £100 into 94. It loses money on the food. It recovers every penny of that loss, and considerably more, on Hawkstone Lager, where he keeps the full margin. It is, in other words, a loss leader with an actual business plan behind it. One that exists to showcase British farming, provide filming locations, and sell beer at full price to people who arrived for the beef. And crucially, the sourcing that the council forced into being at the farm shop, that network of small local suppliers built under duress, followed the pub. The restriction became a network. The network became a supply chain. The supply chain became the pub's provenance story, inherited fully formed from a fight the council thought it had won somewhere else entirely. Then there's the piece of this operation that most people drive past without quite registering what they're looking at. Clarkson's Grand Tour tent, the enormous travelling marquee from his motoring series, the one that used to appear in deserts and mountain ranges around the world for Amazon's cameras. now sits permanently on the grounds of the farmer's dog, repurposed, retired from international television production, and put to work as a retail and dining space. Inside it, Hops and Chops, a butcher's shop trading under the Hawkstone name, and the Farmer's Puppy, an outdoor kitchen operation. It is, quite literally, a piece of television history converted into a trading floor. And here is the detail that deserves more attention than it gets. A marquee, structurally, occupies a different category to a permanent building in planning terms. It is not the same fight the farm shop had. It does not sit under the same restrictive conditions. It exists in the gap between what the council has spent 3 years learning to regulate and what it hasn't yet had reason to. Every visitor who cannot get a table inside the pub, and on a Saturday in summer, plenty can't, can still walk 20 feet and spend money under canvas instead. Every square foot of the operation is earning. Nobody leaves empty-handed simply because the dining room was full. This is not an accident of geography. This is a man who has spent 3 years learning exactly which forms of retail activity draw scrutiny and which ones for now don't, and building accordingly. So let's actually add it up, because the individual pieces are impressive, but it's the sum that tells you what really happened here. The farm shop, built from a shed and a hand-painted sign, now turning over an estimated £2 million a year, drawing 250,000 visitors, its assets having grown from £44,000 to well over £1 million within its first proper year of trading. The Farmer's Dog, bought for £1 million, renovated into a 146 employee operation with a 360 space car park, now valued at several times its purchase price on the strength of what it's become rather than what it cost. The Grand Tour tent and its retail operations, Hops and Chops the Farmer's Puppy, extracting revenue from every visitor the other two can't seat or serve. Put together, conservative estimates place the combined value of Clarkson's retail and hospitality operations, the shop, the pub, the tent, the whole visitor-facing side of the business that isn't the farmland itself and isn't the brewery, somewhere in the region of £8 million. Now that's a meaningful sum of money on its own terms, but set it against what actually built it, and the number becomes almost beside the point. He didn't get there with a marketing department. He didn't get there with a national retail strategy or a chain of consultants advising on customer acquisition costs. He got there because a district council, acting entirely within its legal rights and its stated planning priorities, kept trying to make the operation smaller, and every single attempt was filmed, aired and watched by an audience who had already decided, long before any letter was written, whose side they were on. Go back to that shed, to the potatoes and the hand-painted sign and the honesty box that nobody at West Oxfordshire District Council could possibly have imagined would end up here. What they couldn't see, what nobody could have seen, because the cameras hadn't started rolling yet, was that every tool at their disposal to restrict this business would, in the hands of a television production, function as fuel instead. The sourcing radius that should have strangled the farm shop's range instead built it a supply chain worth more than money. The enforcement notices that should have shut down the restaurant instead sent Clarkson a mile down the road to buy a pub the council had no leverage over at all. The refusals, the objections, the planning meetings, every one of them became a scene in a story that millions of people were already emotionally invested in, and every scene sent more people driving to Chipping Norton to see it for themselves. The council thought they had leverage. What they actually had was a recurring, unpaid, entirely unwitting role as co-writers on one of the most watched farming series Amazon has ever produced. And here's the part that should genuinely unsettle anyone in British retail who's paying attention. This isn't really a story about Jeremy Clarkson's charm or his television profile or the particular strangeness of a man who was sacked by the BBC over an incident involving a cold steak now running a small rural retail empire. Those things helped. They didn't cause it. What caused it was a genuinely simple insight that almost nobody in retail acts on, because it requires accepting a level of public friction that most businesses spend enormous amounts of money trying to avoid. Opposition, filmed honestly and aired without flinching, is worth more to a brand built on authenticity than any advertising campaign money can buy. The council's resistance wasn't a problem Clarkson had to manage around. It was the single most valuable piece of marketing collateral the entire operation ever produced, and it cost him nothing beyond the patience to keep filming through it. That's the trick nobody in West Oxfordshire District Council saw coming in 2020, and if we're honest, it's the trick that most councils across Britain still haven't clocked, because most businesses on the receiving end of planning enforcement don't have a camera crew and don't have an audience of millions who've already decided the council is the villain of the piece. Clarkson did, and he built £8 million of retail and hospitality business on the back of people trying, with entirely good intentions and a completely defensible legal position, to stop him. If you've been enjoying this one so far, do hit like, drop a comment, subscribe and tap that notification bell, because there's a great deal more of this story still to come, and you'll want to be here for it. Here's a question worth sitting with for a moment, because it's the one that separates this from a simple story about a lucky celebrity. If the formula is this clear, build something authentic, let regulators push back, film the pushback, let the audience do the rest, why hasn't every struggling rural retailer in Britain done exactly the same thing? The honest answer is that most of them can't, and it isn't because they lack the courage. They lack the audience that arrives preloaded with sympathy. Clarkson didn't build his relationship with millions of viewers through the farm shop. He built it over decades on television, first through Top Gear and then the Grand Tour, cultivating a persona, stubborn, exasperated, gloriously unembarrassed by his own failures, that audiences had already decided to like long before a single potato was sold. When the council pushed back against that man, viewers weren't reacting to a stranger being inconvenienced. They were reacting to someone they already felt they knew, being told no by an institution they'd already been primed, culturally, to view with a degree of suspicion. That's not something you can replicate with a good camera and a strongly worded caption. It's decades of built trust, redirected, and there's a second reason, quieter but just as important. The friction has to be real. West Oxfordshire District Council was not performing a role in a script. They were doing their actual job, applying actual planning law, citing an actual area of outstanding natural beauty designation that actually exists and that they are actually obligated to protect. Every objection they raised had genuine legal weight behind it. That authenticity is precisely what made it compelling television, and precisely what makes it impossible to fake. The moment an audience senses that opposition has been manufactured for content, the entire mechanism collapses. Nobody drives 40 minutes to Chipping Norton to witness a staged argument. So the lesson here isn't quite get your council to oppose you and profit follows. It's something closer to this. If you're building something genuinely authentic, and you happen to encounter genuine institutional resistance, resist the very natural urge to hide that friction from your audience. Show it. Let people watch the letters arrive. Let them watch the enforcement notice get read aloud. Because an audience that watches a business survive genuine opposition trusts that business in a way no advertising campaign has ever managed to replicate. The council never set out to build Clarkson £8 million of retail value. They set out to protect a stretch of Cotswold countryside from what looked, entirely reasonably at the time, like unchecked commercial sprawl around a wooden shed. They were doing their job properly, by the book, with genuine public interest at heart. They handed a former BBC presenter with a camera crew and a captive audience the single most valuable business asset he never had to pay for. There is, if you think about it for long enough, something almost beautifully English about that. The institution did exactly what it was supposed to do. The entrepreneur did exactly what regulators never expect anyone to do, which is thank them for it, quietly, by building an empire out of their objections. Somewhere in Chipping Norton right now, there is very possibly another planning meeting taking place, another condition being considered, another letter being drafted by someone at West Oxfordshire District Council who is, in all likelihood, entirely unaware that they are about to write the opening scene of next season's most watched episode. There's a line worth remembering from all of this, and it isn't one Clarkson wrote himself. It's one that emerges from watching the whole thing unfold in order. You cannot restrict a feeling with a planning condition. You can only make it stronger. That's the real story here. Not the shed, not the 16 miles, not even the pub with its 360 parking spaces waiting for pilgrims rather than regulars. The real story is that a council did its job, properly and honestly, and in doing so became the unwitting architect of one of the most talked about small retail success stories in modern British business. If you've enjoyed today's story, do subscribe and tap the notification bell, and have a look at the video on your screen right now, which we think you'll enjoy just as much. Drop us a comment below. We'd genuinely love to know. Have you ever queued for something you believed in, the way people queue at Diddley Squat? Thank you, as always, for watching. As always, for